To say a kid wakes up one day and decides they're a girl and gets put on puberty blockers is like saying a kid wakes up one day and says they have cancer and receives chemotherapy. It's just not how healthcare works.
I've actually had to take my daughter out of public school because of an incident where a teacher tried to start teaching 6-year-olds about gender ideology.
A lot of therapy comes first, a mental health evaluation comes first, a diagnosis of gender dysphoria comes first, and informed consent of both the kid and the parents comes first.
Okay.
You're about to watch a debate on gender-affirming care for trans youth and whether it's something that's justifiable or not. Let me know in the comments what points you agree with, what points you disagree with, and be sure to let us know who you thought won. We're talking about gender-affirming care today for minors, something that I think is very important to defend, as trans youth deserve the same rights as any other youth, and healthcare is a right. Most of the arguments against, and I'm sure you'll hear plenty of them today, are based on falsehoods or lies. You'll hear about things like child mutilation, which doesn't happen. I would challenge any opponent or proponent of this to name a single child who has had this happen to, if that was the case, but you can't because it's a lie. Which it's important to understand what gender affirming care actually is. And like most healthcare, it varies by age and by need. Young children are just going to receive therapy and affirmative language. Young teens and preteens who are going into puberty will just receive puberty blockers. And around 16 is the average age to start hormone therapy. Both of these measures are reversible, and both of these measures have been used on children for decades for other forms of treatments as well. Only when it comes to trans kids does this become an issue for some people, because it's more about inherent bias than what's actually best for the children. And there's a long process of steps that come before this would happen anyway. Another common lie that you hear is that kids just decide they're trans one day or say they're the other gender and they get put on these things immediately, when in reality, a lot of therapy comes first, a mental health evaluation comes first, a diagnosis of gender dysphoria comes first, and informed consent of both the kid and the parents comes first. To say a kid wakes up one day and decides they're a girl and gets put on puberty blockers is like saying a kid wakes up one day and says they have cancer and receives chemotherapy. It's just not how healthcare works, but typically more transphobic minded individuals have to build a caricature of what the LGBTQ world is to make it easier to argue against. Another common talking point you hear is, oh, it's a mental disorder, so why would you push that on children? When it's not being pushed on children. Gender identity is something you're born with. It's a sense of self within you. And if these people think it's a mental disorder, then they should support kids receiving the treatment for it anyway. You don't say, oh, this kid has autism, let me just tell him that he's normal. And all statistics point to the benefits of gender affirming care and what it does for the youth. Studies have shown 60% lower odds of depression, 73% lower odds of suicidality among youth who have taken these treatments. Other studies have linked increases in life satisfaction and lower anxiety symptoms as well. Another myth that I'm willing to debunk is the argument of they detransition. Only 2.5% of trans youth were reported to have detransitioned after a 5-year checkup. Of those, the majority were only socially transitioned before 6 and were cisgender by 10, meaning they never received any intervention, just affirmation, being called by preferred pronouns, wearing clothes associated with their preferred gender, and receiving therapy. The percent of youth who detransition after interventions is actually closer to 1% or just under, showing that these kids know how they feel, who they really are, and in that instance, denying their gender and invalidating a sense of self within them only leads to substantially worse mental and physical health outcomes for them, and commonly ends in suicide.
I just wanted to say, like, I'm not coming at this from any sort of like hate, like with anything in my heart, do you know what I mean, towards trans people or anything like that. I've got no problem with anybody who identifies however they like. But the reason I'm so passionate about this topic is because I've actually had to take my daughter out of public school because of an incident where a teacher tried to start teaching 6-year-olds about gender ideology and stuff, brought a teddy bear into class, tried to start pointing at the teddy bear's genital area, saying, this teddy bear has no gender. Do you know what I mean? My daughter came home from school in tears, like completely like baffled, confused, didn't know what was going on. So that's why like I've got such strong views on it. Do you know what I mean? Like I think like kids shouldn't be allowed to be introduced or even exposed to anything to do with gender ideology until they're at least 18. I think maybe like mental health, that's fine. If they need help with mental health and stuff, they can speak to a psychiatrist or whatever they need to. But I think things like hormone therapy and stuff, that's irreversible, like with in terms of fertility and stuff. People can like not be able to have kids and things because of the medication and stuff. Do you know what I'm saying? And I just think it's put on a lot by social pressures, by people like making kids think, oh, like it's the new trend. Do you know what I mean? And like I think if people just sought counselling, then they'd end up either being gay or lesbian in the end, instead of like having to go through medical procedures or surgeries. Like, and that's pretty much the way I think about it.
Okay, so I just had a couple things that I wanted to respond to. I'll start the timer so I don't go over 2 minutes. Sex education at a younger age is actually shown to better outcomes in terms of less likelihood to be sexually abused throughout your childhood as an adult, to deal with these. So I don't necessarily have a problem with sex education for youth. And I think that the more prevalent that transgenderism and gender ideology becomes in the mainstream, that adding that into sex education is only valid. That's just, I mean, it's something borne out in data. You spoke to a psychiatrist being fine. Most young kids around the age of 6 to 10 are only going to be receiving therapy anyway. So I think that on that grounds, at least, it mostly fits into the things you support. I know you said obviously the things at school you weren't as okay with and things like that. But like therapy and affirmation is the main treatments for pre-pubescent kid, like adolescents. They're just going to talk to a doctor, talk to a therapist, receive mental health evaluations. And then the last thing I wanted to respond to was your statement on hormone therapy. To be clear, all medicines have a possibility of adverse side effects. Like if you take Tylenol, there's possible liver complications that you could have, right? With hormone therapy, these complications aren't exceeding the normal level or what is typically seen in medicines that you can take. So it's not any more risky. And there's also been plenty of studies that have shown that fertility can return within 3 to 6 months, for some people more than a year, if you are to cease taking the hormone treatments. That a large percent in trans men, so biological female, it was as high as 80%. It's a little lower for biological males, trans women, but still more likely. There's been studies that have shown, again, after 3, 6, up to 18 months of stopping taking these, that fertility can return.
See, my problem with that is, why can't they just receive the mental health advice until they're 18 and then start the hormone therapy, then start the puberty blockers if that's how they feel then? Because you can still take them after you've passed puberty.
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of two different arguments. For hormone therapy, yeah, you can take it at 18. You could. I get that. With puberty blockers, the point of puberty blockers is to stop your body from developing in a way that your gender ideology, your sense of self, doesn't agree with. So the point of taking them would be before puberty onsets, because like if you're a trans woman, for instance, you start going through puberty and getting like a deeper voice, more of like, hairy legs, these kinds of things associated with boys going through puberty. It's going to kind of invalidate that self-affirmation of who you are.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, yeah, but I still think if there was to receive mental health, like close one-to-one help, then eventually, like studies show that they're going to end up either being gay or lesbian. Do you know what I mean? Like they're going to just grow into their self, and there's nothing wrong with that. But obviously, it's not going through surgery and not going through medicine and stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, the therapy is a part of it. Like, it's not like they discontinue therapy, but like all data on the matter supports that going through these treatments, being able to block puberty so your body can match what your sense of self is, lowers depression, lowers anxiety. Like, for instance, there was a study in the UK where there was 101 it was 201 trans youths, 101 kids got puberty blockers and 100 who didn't. The mental health score for the group who took the puberty blockers was 5 percentage points higher than those who didn't. There was another study in the Dutch where 272 kids who identified as trans or non-binary didn't receive puberty blockers. 178 did receive them, and they found the same results. I believe it was 5 points high or 6 points higher for them in terms of mental health evaluation.
Okay. Well, I was looking at some statistics yesterday. You heard of WPATH, like the trans activist like organization?
I don't, like, not off the tip of my tongue, but I'm sure I've
Yeah,
read.
but I mean, well, they're like strong advocates for the trans movement, and they found themselves that suicide rates in the youth raised at the same time as hormone treatments. And obviously, these hormone treatments, they're only, how long have they been around? they're used for prostate treatments, and they haven't done proper clinical trials with them. These kids are basically the guinea pigs. They're being used as the clinical trials. That's what my sort of problem is with it. Do you know what I mean? They don't need to have medication introduced or surgery introduced or anything like that until they're old enough to say, yeah, this is how I want to live my life. A 5-year-old, 6-year-old can't start saying, yeah, I want to be a girl. Do you know what I mean? I've got a 9-year-old daughter. If she came to me now and said, I'm a boy, do you know what I mean? It wouldn't be a case of, oh, let's go and start getting some medication and start getting surgeries. It'd be like, yeah, we're going to go and talk to somebody about it, like, and when you're older, if that's still how you feel.
Yeah, so youths don't get surgery, bottom surgery at least. There's no genital surgery that happens for anyone under the age of
Well, they
18.
have like mastectomies, don't they? Like 13-year-olds.
No,
A
no.
lot.
For kids, there is which it's still rare instances, and it's typically
I've
16-year-olds.
seen something yesterday, but sorry to interrupt you, but it said something yesterday between 2019 2021 there was 776 mastectomies for 13 to 17-year-olds.
I don't know. I mean, it's not associated with gender affirming care. For gender affirming care, there's top surgeries that happen. Like there's kids who get like nose jobs, or they'll get like, boob jobs, those kinds of things, which I mean, it is also important, which if you're against that, that's one thing. But it is important to note that like cisgender children, like who aren't trans, aren't trying to transition, also get these same surgeries. Like they get nose surgeries, they'll get boob surgeries
Yeah,
at
but it's not,
times.
but that like a double mastectomy when you're 13, it's a big thing, really. I mean, what's the actual point anyway? It's like you haven't even started to develop yet, and you're already getting them removed. Do you know what I mean? Wouldn't it make more sense to wait until you're older and they've developed, and then you can make the decision? And it would probably be a bit of a safer procedure.
Yeah, that is in gender affirming care. You are like to wait till you're 18 to get any type of a bottom surgery. And when you're 13, you would be taking like puberty blockers, and you would be taking hormone therapy when you turn like 15, 16. And like I said, you said about your 9-year-old, if she started coming to you and saying, I don't know if you said it was a girl or a boy, but said they were the other gender, that they would just receive therapy. Like it's usually like year or two of therapy. You're going to see a doctor, you're going to get a mental health evaluation, you have to get a diagnosis specifically of gender dysphoria before you can receive any actual intervention. So it's not like she would come to you one day and then that's like that same week she would be on puberty blockers.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but it's still, I mean, my problem is things like, see, like, I mean, it's not in my country right now, but like, Gavin Newsom is trying to pass that bill where the school doesn't have to inform the parents if a child decides like, they have some sort of gender dysphoria. Is that true?
Yeah. So the bill I think was taken kind of out of context. What it is that if which mo it, to kind of preface it, I think it's 63% of trans youth have parents who are like will get abused by their parents specifically for coming out as what they are. So what his bill aimed to do was to give kids a safe space. It's not for like reference, like the teacher isn't starting them on gender affirming care. The teacher isn't directing the therapy. He's just providing money to schools to have like a safe space for kids to open up to. And the procedure that the teachers work on them with is making them feel comfortable to then tell their parents. Like it would be working towards bringing their parents in and saying like giving them the tools that they need to communicate this and their feelings to their parents. It's not because I don't know about like, I'm not saying you said this specifically, but I covered this on my channel. A lot of conservatives, when they were talking about this bill, were trying to say like, oh, now teachers can be the one to prescribe the puberty blockers. Teachers can start them on the gender affirming care, but it's more just about a safe space and having somewhere that these kids can come out and tell somebody if they feel like they can't to their parents.
I'm not saying, yeah, it's fair enough. Obviously, that's why I agree with the mental health side of things. If it's just a case of, yeah, like a little group where they can all talk about what they're going through, that's fair enough, because obviously they shouldn't be isolated from it. But it's just my main problem is people interfering with kids and stuff. Do you know, like I can't, like that's obviously understandable. You can't be like a little kid, someone of 6, 7, 8 years old can't make a decision that's life altering, like from that age. Do you know what I mean? They can't. It can't be done.
Well, so most kids, like actually, when it comes to, I feel like sense of self, kids typically are pretty spot on. Like most kids know they're gay before they even become sexual. Like you hear a lot of cases of same-sex homosexual adults who are saying like, I realized that I was gay at like 6, 7, 8, 9 years old before they were even sexual. There's kids, the detransition, like I said, less than 2.5% of youth detransition after coming out as the other gender, and only less than 1% transition after intervention. So these kids who are coming out and saying they feel this way typically stick to it and don't actually detransition. And then there's also studies who show the majority of kids who do detransition, it's because of social pressure. It's because of pressure from their family or society, and they don't actually transition back to the gender they were assigned at birth. They just instead identify as non-binary.
Yeah, I did see something about that. But see, the problem is, I think as well, the statistics can't exactly be correct because a lot of things I've seen, like, have you heard of Kat Cattinson, who's a detransitioner? She was like, she's an outspoken detransitioner, and she got death threats from the trans community for speaking out about her regrets. So a lot of people, I think, are a bit scared to speak out about it because it looks bad on the trans community, because they still don't want to hurt the trans community, but they know deep down in themselves they regret what they've done.
I think I mean, obviously there's going to be social pressure on both sides, like the same way that kids feel social pressure not to come out, they're going to feel social pressure not to detransition. But I mean, the overwhelming majority of kids just don't detransition. And I don't think that like I feel like it's a lot harder to identify as something you're not with social pressure. Like it's not going to leave you in that role. Like even despite, again, like most kids being invalidated by their parents, it's not normalized in society, they still do eventually end up coming out and saying like, hey, like this isn't the gender that I identify with. I think you would see a lot more of that if that was the case with people detransitioning.
Yeah. Well, then, like you just said, like, people, they end up coming out and saying, yeah, this isn't the way I've always felt. I'm gay or a lesbian, sort of, like, do you know what I mean? Or whatever they want to identify as. But then why don't they just, like I say, receive mental health treatment instead of going through, like, I mean, I've seen yesterday 56 genital surgeries for 13 to 17-year-olds between 2019 and 2021. That's under 17-year-olds receiving genital surgeries, like, to transition.
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, to my knowledge, that's not like part of gender affirming care. Even if it was, like, I don't know about exactly the numbers you're quoting, but to concede if it was, that's 56 out of like there's I mean 0.5% of the population. That's like 100,000 in America at least. You know, that's like less than a percent, less than half
Oh,
of a
but
percent.
that was only up until 2021. I mean, obviously the numbers are going to have dramatically increased since then. I
Well,
mean, like,
I don't
if
know
you
if
look,
that would be true,
you,
especially when you look at most of these clinics. If you look at what they lay out, like you could look at the Seattle clinic, you can look at all these like the California clinic, the ones that are more mainstream. They specifically say that they do not allow bottom surgeries before the age of 18. Like the
yeah,
overwhelming majority of clinics do not allow those procedures. I'm sure maybe you could find like odd apples or something, you know, who might, but it's going to always be like an anomaly. It's going to be by far the minority.
but I still think, I mean, it's a dangerous, slippery slope if people are allowing it in some places. I mean, it only takes for the idea to spread and people to start thinking it's acceptable, and then kids are getting life-changing surgery that's gonna, like, they could regret in 10 years, and that's it. Like, and plus even the hormone therapy, like you say, I mean, it might be a small risk of infertility, but still, what's the point in taking that risk when you can
Well,
just
it's
go on?
because the possible benefits of the success far outweigh the risks. It's like saying like if a kid broke his legs and the surgery to fix his legs, there was a chance that he might never walk again. You're not going to say, well, this kid can't consent to this procedure. You're going to let him get the surgery because the benefits of the life satisfaction improvements, if he got the surgery, will far outweigh the minute risk of he might never walk again.
I know what you're saying, but that's like a physical, like, disability that they're going to have for the rest of their life. But that's something that they can put off and seek the right medical, like, mental health advice. And then by the time they get to an age where they think, right, now I know what I want to do, then they can decide to go and start taking medicines and start having surgeries and stuff. And it's just, I think they shouldn't be even introduced to anything medical or surgical until they're at least 18.
Well, to be clear, the same can be said about like mental disorders. There's medicines that kids can be prescribed for depression, for anxiety. Like if a kid is autistic, there's medicines they might be prescribed, and it's because the benefits of the success of the medicines far outweigh what the minute risk is. If a kid has a headache and you want to give them Tylenol, obviously it's much more likely that that Tylenol is going to help their headache rather than they're going to get the liver failure that is a possible side effect of Tylenol. You're not going to withhold that from the child. I would hope, at least. I don't know you
I know
personally.
what you mean, but the difference is Tylenol would be a short term, couple of days, or maybe like tops. You'd be taking. This is a prescription
Well,
that
what
you're going
about
to
like for
be.
depression and anxiety, like medicines you can get prescribed for that? Are you against children like
Yeah, to be honest,
for depression or anxiety?
I would never prescribe kids under 16, under the age of 16, antidepressants. I think that's ridiculous. The best medicine for anybody is to get outside and, do you know what I mean? Just going and like taking antidepressants is never the answer for a little kid. That's just like a crazy idea.
Well, I mean, you're consistent in your belief at least, so I can't knock you there. But like, for instance, I mean, the medicines that you will be receiving for gender affirming care is completely reversible, like puberty blockers. GnRHA is the main one, and if you stop taking it, the all the things that it stops or prevents from happening will continue again. And like all studies like confirm that, especially with puberty blockers. Like with hormone therapy, there is like some of the slight risk, like with fertility, like that, even though it is in the minority. With puberty blockers, it's like 100% reversible. If you stop taking puberty blockers, puberty will begin to onset.
Yeah, but what if it's too late? What if you've been taking them through puberty and you decide to stop taking them at 18, 19, 20? Puberty's not going to start again, is it? It's not like you can put it on pause.
Well, like the normal, like the development of the different functions does start back, like reproductive functions, things like that. If you just stop taking them, they will begin to
But
develop.
males testicles, they don't recover, do they? They
Yeah, yeah.
shrink.
Like the reproductive functions all will start again if you stop taking puberty blockers. It's different, like I said, it's different with hormone therapy, which is why typically you have to be a bit older, you have to be a lot longer, further down the line for hormone therapies. But for puberty blockers, like they're completely reversible. Puberty blockers are used for endometriosis. It's used for like a bunch of different things. Like if people have early onset puberty, kids who will like go and start their puberty development at like 6, 7, they'll be prescribed puberty blockers to stop that until they're the correct age. These things, and they could take those for 5, 6, 7 years. Like these things are completely reversible if you stop taking them.
Well, I mean, only if you take them around the right time, though. Like, because, like I say, like, I mean, once, if a girl started taking puberty blockers at age 10
Hmm.
to stop, obviously, like things forming, and then by the time she gets to 20, she decides, no, I don't want to be a boy, and then stops taking them. Is she still going to develop breasts the same as she would?
I don't know, like, I mean, like, obviously they might not be the same size, they might not be to the same extent, but in terms of like the important things, like reproductive functions develop completely back, her I'm forgetting. Not testosterone. What is it? Why am
Estrogen.
I estrogen?
Estrogen.
Yes, her estrogen production will resume to normal. These things will all go back. I'm sure. Like, yeah, maybe like she won't grow as much boobs or things like that. But like, I think those are a bit more menial in terms of what should actually matter of like development.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of them. I mean, like I'll give you a couple of statistics, and it's kind of obviously you're going to dispute them. It's unless you've got them in front of you yourself as well. It's kind of my word against yours. But like I just obviously I stand by my point that I just don't think people under the age of 18 have the right mind to be making decisions for the rest of their life. Like that's pretty much an obvious thing to me.
In most instances, it's not decisions for the rest of your life because, like I said, if you stop taking them, they're reversible. And I mean, there's like a multitude of studies that not only affirm that they're reversible, but affirm the benefits. There's been 16 wide-ranging studies that all link reducing depression and anxiety, suicidality, increase in life satisfaction. And there's actually studies as well that show that beginning these treatments as an adolescent gives you less possibility of developing these symptoms as an adult. So they took people who started puberty blockers and hormone therapy strategies in their teens with a group who started them after the age of 18. And the group that started these treatments in their teens had lower rates of depression, anxiety, suicidality as adults than the other group did by the age of, I think it was like 24 or 25.
Well, I found yesterday a study about how, like, it was from that same W path, and they're saying that from 2017, the gender dysphoria people from age 6 to 17 who identified with gender dysphoria raised from 1,900 in 2017 to 4,200 in 2021. Like around the same time, all these hormone therapies and puberty blockers sort of came into fashion, sort of thing. So that's why I just think it's sort of a social contagion where people are just jumping on the bandwagon and thinking, I think it's cool to be this, I think it's cool to be that. And then all of a sudden they're getting 10 years down the line and they can't change what they've done.
So a good parallel to draw to that is left-handedness. I believe in like the 40s or 50s, 60s, one of those older times, you can see the chart of people who were left-handed where it's like down here. And then when because a lot of schools, they thought like, especially in Catholic schools, they thought if you're left-handed, it's like a sign of the devil or like all these other things. But then when schools started accepting people who were left-handed, it became more normalized in society. The chart literally goes like this, where it's like all of a sudden a lot more people are left-handed. And then after like a decade or so, it flattens out where it's normal. And I don't think anyone would say that left-handedness is a social contagion. I think that it just shows that, again, as we were speaking to about social pressure, once some of these societal pressures are reduced or not there anymore, people feel more comfortable in identifying with the way that they actually are.
Well, I mean, for thousands of years, we've like lived without these medications and stuff and surgeries. So, I mean, where's
And the
been the,
depression and suicide rates were a lot worse for
but,
trans people back then too.
but I mean, we would have had a suicide pandemic, wouldn't we? Of people
Well,
just,
I mean, no, because they don't make up like a large percent of the population. And also like not all of them end up committing suicide. A lot of them just live with severe depression, severe anxiety, these kinds of things, which was more prevalent before these treatments.
yeah, okay, fair enough. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think we're going to fully agree on the subject because obviously you've got your views and I've got mine, but obviously you've opened my eyes to a couple of things, but I still think I'm going to stand my ground on the fact that I don't want no kids to be having no surgeries and no medications. I just think good family mental health advice, that's the best way to solve anything. Do you know what I mean?
So let me ask you then, I guess if a kid does identify as the other gender, let's say it's persistent, not just day one, let's say that they've identified this way for a year. They've been consistently telling their parents, like I don't associate with the roles, the expectations of males. I feel more like a girl, a woman.
How old are they?
I don't let's just go different. Let's do two different ages just to see if the responses differ. One's 10 and one's 16, both the same situation. Do you think the family should affirm that after, let's say, a year of continually them saying this? Do you think
with
they
the
should validate
16
that?
with the 16-year-old, yeah, I'd probably agree. Yeah, that they could start going down that path. Like, but with the 10-year-old, no, I wouldn't agree with that. I'd definitely make them wait till they was 16, 17, 18 to start making any sort of decisions like that.
Well, like let's say, well, and I don't know if you mean this or not, but like leaving like interventions out, like puberty blockers, hormone therapy, all of that out. You just think that even with the 10-year-old, that the family should just say what should they say?
I should say we'll go and see the doctor. We'll speak to him about seeing a psychiatrist or like a mental health professional, and we'll see how you exactly like why it is you're feeling the way you're feeling. Like we'll get to the root of what it is you're feeling, and then see where we go from there. And I mean that's probably going to take a couple of years in itself, and we'll just support her at the same time. Just keep going through the steps. I just think medication and surgery is a last resort, like in all cases.
Well, I'm just talking about with affirmation, like because like and just validation, like if they just want it to be called, if it was a boy and he's 10 and he's just been going on for a year saying like I would prefer to be called a girl, I would prefer to go by she, her, you would even say that's too much.
Well, I mean, if it was my son, I've got a 15-year-old son. I mean, if he come to me and said, "Dad, like, I want to be a girl," it'd be a case of I'd go through the same procedure with him. I'd say, "Look, we're gonna have to go and speak to someone who's a professional in mental health. Like, make sure like this is coming from a place of your own feelings and not any social pressures where someone's saying to you, this is what we're all doing. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then I'd just do that, go down that road. I wouldn't shun him out the family. I wouldn't say like, oh, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. But I'd definitely just still go with the same approach, just speaking to them, getting into their head and realizing why they're feeling the way they're feeling and deal with it that way.
I think that's more of an empathetic stance than most people have. But I do really like, I just want to ask one more time because like I want to be sure like what exactly like the perspective of like leaving medications and interventions out of it. Like your 9-year-old, for instance, let's say from today till when she was, I always forget, was it a girl or a boy?
Oh yeah, should go.
Girl. Okay, so from now till when she was 10, she says that she identifies as a boy. At 10, would you then be down to say, like, just pronoun wise, no interventions? Like, would you let her, like, I don't know, play with boys' toys if she wants to dress more like a boy, like wants to be called a he? Would you validate these things, or would you be like even against that at that age?
I think if she wanted to dress like a boy and wanted to play with boys' toys and stuff, that's not a problem. That's whatever. You know, she probably does that half the time now. She like, but I would never call her he.
Mm.
Like until
So
I wouldn't. To be honest, even if she fully transitioned into a woman, I don't think I'd ever be able to call my actual daughter he. I mean, into a man. Sorry, I don't
mm.
think I'd ever be able to actually say like, "This is my son." I'd be like, "This is my daughter that's transitioned into a man." Like it just wouldn't feel natural for me.
What do you think that would do to like the sense of self for a child having to grow up feeling a certain way, but like even their family isn't really affirming them? They're telling them no, like you're just like
I know what you're
different.
saying. Look, I mean, you're talking about like, I mean, obviously, my family, the way my family is, like personally, like it wouldn't be like a sort of a stigma thing. It'd be more of a friendly sort of like a not a joke because it's not a joke, but like more of a jovial thing where I'd be like, yeah, like here's my son, like do you know what I mean? My son daughter sort of thing. It would be a joke between us, and she knows me like the way she does. But I can
Yeah.
understand what you're saying, where people would be like, no, this is my son, like do you know what I mean, not my
Yeah.
daughter, like, and that would obviously mess with people's heads. But like I don't agree with people that treat their kids that way in any way, like that try and make their kids feel like they're less than they are. Like your kids should be held above you, like ultimately, do you know what I mean? But
Mhm.
obviously I just disagree with younger people making life changing decisions.
Hmm. Well, I mean, you seem to be pretty consistent in that belief, in that you don't think that, like, for any mental health outcomes, that there should be medical intervention or anything like that. And you seem to come from a position of less malice than most people do. I think it's warming, at least, that you wouldn't be completely invalidating of like your children and things. I guess the point that I was trying to get to would be like for instance, if you grew up in your entire life, your parents called you a she, called you a her, called you a little girl. I'm sure you could imagine the kind of like mental degradation or the effects that that would have on your mental state and well-being growing up and being like, well, I think I'm a boy, like I feel like a boy, I think I look like a boy, but my parents keep calling me a girl. Like you kind of would lose that sense of self that is important for children to develop. That is like, I feel
That's
like
why it's important. That's
um,
why it's important to talk with your kids and your family and make sure you're all on the same page and no one's sitting in their room stuck on social media and like just getting lost in that world of craziness, like and making sure everything's open and on the table and you know what's going on in your kids' lives. And if that starts to creep into their head, then you'll know from the beginning and it'll be something you can deal with from an early stage instead of letting it spiral out of control and going down the road of antidepressants and then puberty blockers and then all this. Do you know what I mean? Where it can just be solved by sitting down together as a family and discussing what the problem is.
yeah, I agree, as long as that sitting down comes with like affirmation and validation, you know, and not just saying like, no, you can never be this, like you have to be what I think you are, like you can't identify this way. I am curious though, asking, because you said, you know, you would be willing to take them to a doctor, take them to a therapist. Let's say like you did those steps, and after doing those steps, the therapist says, hey, like I do think that some sort of intervention would help with their mental state. Would you be with the therapist, or would you go against the therapist in that regard?
I'd say to the therapist, we'll wait until she's 16 or he's 16, and we'll carry on with the psychiatry, with the mental health analysis and stuff, and then we'll see where we're at when they're not an adult, but when they're 16 and they can start making sort of informed decisions instead of like, because I know I can remember what I was like at 15. Do you know what I mean? I was an idiot. Like I was doing the craziest things you can think of, and like to
Did you
think
know
that
you were
someone,
straight?
yeah, of course,
Well, there you go. You knew your sense of self though, and that
yeah,
hasn't
but
changed.
that's different. Do you know what I mean? Like obviously, like I said, I would accept their identity if they wanted to say like I want to be this sort of person, but I wouldn't confirm it until they was of age where they could make that decision. Like, and I know they're talking to me as someone who's on the level, who's like not warped by anybody else's pressures.
Mhm. So yeah, I think we have probably more agreement than we do disagreement. I think the biggest thing we disagree on is just age of intervention and things like that. So I don't know how much more we would have to hash out. If you had any other points you wanted to
No,
bring up or questions to pose for me.
no, it's all good, man. Thanks for the time. It was good.
Yeah, yeah. Did you want to like close with it? Do you have like a closing or anything like that you want to do, or lay out your perspective one more time in full or something?
Well, I think we've pretty much got to the point. I just think kids should be kids, and that's it. You know what I mean? Like until you're of a certain age, your brain's not ready for big decisions or life changing like procedures. It's just you should be being a kid. That's it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I guess I would expand that to where, I mean, most kids, like if you end up being cis and end up being straight, you know when you're a kid that you're straight, you feel straight, you feel like if like you're a boy, you felt like a boy when you were a kid. I would say that the same is true for trans children. They're not like an anomaly, they're not weird, they're not different. And I think that kids should be able to be kids. And a large part of allowing kids to be kids is not invalidating their feelings, allowing them to develop their own sense of self and not directing what that sense of self should be, because these kind of developmental characteristics are really important to who you turn out to be. And denying that throughout your whole childhood just leaves you with a mess of problems once you become an adult.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to hop on and give your perspective. I'm sure we could maybe figure out some other things to hash out, maybe where there's more disagreements or something that we could
Yeah,
have you back on.
100%. Definitely, man. We'll get it on again soon. Nice one.
Yep. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, my man.